The laughter came at exactly the wrong moment. A middle-aged man sat in a hospital consultation room, staring at a paper coffee cup that had long since gone cold. Across from him, a doctor explained gently that his recovery would take longer than anyone had hoped. The clock on the wall seemed to grow louder in the silence that followed. Then, almost unexpectedly, the man laughed. Not loudly, not because anything was funny, just a quiet sound that seemed to surprise even him. The doctor paused. For a moment, it felt almost inappropriate. Years ago, many physicians would have reached a simple conclusion. Denial. Maybe his mind couldn't accept what it had just heard. But over time, doctors and neuroscientists began noticing something that didn't fit the theory. The people who laughed, in moments of heartbreak, weren't always avoiding reality. In many cases, they understood it completely. So why did they laugh? That question would eventually lead researchers into hospitals, psychology labs, and brain imaging centers around the world, and what they found changed how they understood the human mind itself. The image of that cold paper cup stayed with the physician long after the appointment ended. It wasn't an isolated moment. A woman laughed while describing the loss of someone she loved. A father smiled while recalling months spent beside a hospital bed. A family traded jokes in a waiting room minutes after devastating news. Again and again, the same pattern appeared, and at first it seemed impossible to explain. If these people were hurting, why didn't they simply cry? One afternoon, a researcher observed two families in the same waiting room. One sat in total silence, staring at the floor. The other looked almost identical, tired eyes, untouched coffee, until someone remembered a disastrous family vacation. A child exaggerated the story, and within seconds, the whole group was laughing. Not because life had gotten easier, because for one brief moment they remembered being a family before they were patients and worried relatives. After the laughter faded, something had shifted. People spoke more openly. They comforted each other more naturally. The hardship hadn't disappeared, but the room had changed. Maybe laughter wasn't pulling people away from reality. Maybe it was pulling them toward each other. Scientists set out to test that idea. Research indexed through PubMed found that genuine laughter activates brain regions tied to emotion and memory. It also lights up circuits tied to reward and social understanding, not the patterns you'd expect from avoidance or denial. The brain wasn't shutting difficult feelings off. It appeared to be working through them. Studies published in the Journal of Psychosomatic Research linked genuine laughter to lower cortisol levels and a rise in endorphins. It's the body's natural comfort chemicals. The illness didn't change. The loss didn't change. What shifted was the body's stress response, as if the nervous system could briefly loosen its grip. That raised a bigger question. If laughter wasn't an escape from pain, what was it doing instead? Research discussed by Harvard Medical School pointed toward oxytocin, the neurochemical tied to trust and bonding, released during shared positive experiences like genuine laughter. Suddenly, the pattern made sense. Those families weren't ignoring their circumstances. They were strengthening the bonds that would help them face it. Pain isolates, laughter reconnects. Perhaps the first sign of hope isn't happiness. Sometimes it's simply hearing yourself laugh again. Still, one mystery remained. Not all laughter sounded the same. Some arrived naturally. Other laughter appeared exactly when a conversation became too painful to continue. Clinical psychologists came to describe this second kind as defensive humor. Imagine carrying a heavy suitcase for hours. The weight never changes, but every few minutes you shift it to the other hand. Humor works much the same way. It doesn't remove the emotional load. It briefly changes how that load is carried. Researchers studying coping styles found people often used humor not to erase pain, but to create enough space to keep moving through it. The healthiest laughter wasn't pretending suffering didn't exist. It was making room for it without letting it consume every moment. Researchers eventually began wondering whether this instinct was uniquely human. Field studies suggested otherwise. Elephants have been documented gathering around a distressed herd member, touching it gently with their trunks, sometimes staying for hours. Laboratory studies have recorded rats working to free a trapped companion, even when no reward is offered, suggesting the pull to ease another's suffering runs deeper than language. One paramedic, what I needed. One paramedic once described hearing a joke moments after a devastating emergency call. To an outsider, it might have sounded heartless. Inside the ambulance, it meant something else entirely. A shared breath between people who understood exactly what they had just witnessed and who cared enough to protect their ability to keep caring. Looking across decades of psychological research, one conclusion kept appearing, echoed in work from the American Psychological Association. People rarely endure life's hardest moments completely alone. Even when words fail, small moments of shared humanity keep appearing. A smile, a familiar story, a quiet laugh in a silent room. Years later, the physician still thought back to that moment. At the time it had looked like denial, now it sounded different. Perhaps what doctors discovered wasn't why people laugh. Perhaps they discovered what the brain reaches for first when pain becomes too heavy to carry alone. The man picked up the cold paper cup and walked toward the door. The laugh was never evidence that the pain was gone. It was evidence that hope was still alive.